And there are, and I always like to say in that realm, there are Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, and atheists that know every tenet and teaching of the Catholic Church. But they don't believe it. They don't profess it. They don't have it, in their hearts. And it has to start. That conversion aspect, and we'll talk about this later when we get into prayer, into sacrament. But one thing that we as Catholics struggle with, and part of it is because of our sacramental nature, is how do we have young people accept, and how do we have young people develop a true relationship with Christ? Because it's so easy for us to say, well, I have a relationship with Jesus, I go to Mass on Sunday. Or, I love God, I go to Mass on Sunday. It's easy for us to become Pharisees and say our goodness is wrapped up in what we do, instead of our goodness is wrapped up in the fact that we know that we are loved by God and that we're responding to that. And so a key for us as ministers is, how do we have young people foster and accept a true relationship with Christ? That's going to be a key element for us. How do we have young people accept and foster a true relationship with Jesus Christ? And we have to provide opportunities for that. Catechesis is one of them. Catechesis is one of them, but how do we provide and foster a true relationship with Christ? It's going to be a big question. Go back to John the 23rd. Any other thoughts on the reading? His goals for the Vatican Council.
I think number 2, discovering the way of teaching the faith more effectively. I think that gets more and more challenging in youth ministry, especially with the technology the kids know and just the access they have to so much more than we ever had. I mean, the internet and the good and bad. Some of them know so much, and to kind of get that hook, to get them interested in wanting to learn more. I think that's a challenging goal, I think.
And it will constantly be changing. It will constantly be changing. What was effective in the 50s and wasn't effective in the 60s, what was effective in the 60s became ineffective in the 70s, and it continues. It continues.
But yet, are there some rooted things that always stay the same, no matter where we are?
The content of the faith does, and our need to transmit it will always be solid. The question is, how do we transmit it? Is it best for us to transmit it in a sit-down lecture talk? Is it best for us to transmit it in a small group sharing session? Is it the best way for us to transmit it in song, in prayer? That's going to be the constant question and struggle. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So about one thing that has been left, and part of it, one thing that has been left is the class. It hasn't been left, but one thing that we're going to have to return to, at the request of our bishops, is in some ways a way for them to understand the doctrine of the faith, which means that we're going to have to move some way into a teaching model, however that comes about, which is going to be a huge undertaking for our bishops, for our pastors, for us, in the convincing the need for it. Convincing our church today that there is a need. We're gonna look later on the doctrinal elements of the curriculum framework for the development of catechetical materials for young people in high schools. It'll all make sense in a few minutes, but we'll get there. How do leaders of the Catholic Church continue the vision of Jesus in our times? This is us, hopefully. How do we, let's make it quickly personal. How do we continue the vision of Jesus in our times? How do you individually continue the vision of Jesus in your time? In your own parish, in your own area, how do you continue the vision of Jesus in our time?
I myself continue with prayer, to have a personal relationship, to study, to continue to learn, and then to be willing and open and to share.
I think to add to that, it's to also reach out to the youth individual needs and be flexible in what they need, not so much as to what I think they need.
I think it's hard because, like Teresa said, to know what not what I think they need, but to be able to see what they actually need, not what I think they need, and to be able.
They think they don't need anything.
but some do, you know. Luckily, I think they really want, and they just don't know how to ask. I really think they want to know.
Go back to that first chapter. The first chapter.
Mm-hmm.
We're made for that. That longing is in us, and we're going to fill the hole. We're going to fill the hole. The question is, what do we fill it with? And there are so many things in our not that there weren't so many. There are so many things to fill that hole with. What are we going to fill it with? You're going to fill it with Christ. You're going to fill it with sports. You're going to fill it with yourself. You're going to fill it with your boyfriend. Your girl. I mean, there's 1,000 things. But they're longing. They're dying. They're literally killing themselves.
They just don't know how to ask.
Another thing that I have found, on the east side I work with the majority of kids that go to Catholic school, either Sistina or Cathedral, and to them the Catholic faith has become boring, but yet they're not willing to go deeper than their everyday religion class because then it gets hard. And so when you challenge them with something, then they're just totally awestruck, but at the same time they want nothing to do with it because you're challenging them with something more than what they've grown up with.
And Emily just said a really good thing. I was talking to a Catholic psychologist just recently, and he was saying that in the majority of people, you're going to find two things. One, when it really comes down to it, they don't love God. In fact, many of them hate God. If you ask the question why, it's what Emily just said. Because they know that if they love God, that means they need to change. And the majority of us we love our sin. We love our vices. We love whatever it might be in our life, and we realize that there's going to be a choice. So you've hit the hammer on the head. You've hit the nail on the head. Our young people, their hearts are burning for it, but at the same time, they know that if they take that step, they have to change. And so then they get in the conflict of, am I willing to die? Am I willing to sacrifice? Am I willing to change? And what happens to all of us who have been through a conversion experience? There comes a point when you're like, okay, that's it. I'm willing to surrender. I'm willing to say, I'm yours. Totally. And that's the beauty of our faith.
Well, and for me, growing up, I went to all public school. So for me, I've never been challenged with having to be in a religious or in a theology class every day. So for me, my religion came, and my faith came from me exploring on my own, not having it fed to me every day. And so that's where my youth and I we're battling back and forth because I don't get how they're feeling because I never felt that way. And so it's become this kind of conflict for me to try and get through to them and to challenge them on a higher level than what they're used to being challenged.
If God is a thing that you study, if God is a classroom, and if for 12, 13 years of your life, that's how you've known God, or God is a forced issue, not just on Sunday with your parents, but whether it be with Mass or it's going to be a challenge. Something for us to face. Christy.
We've had that issue too. Kay pointed out, the discover ways of teaching the faith more effectively. With having kids that do have religion in school, they immediately shut down when you start a subject. They're like, yeah, I've heard that before, and it was boring, and I didn't. I know that, and whatever, I'm done. And they stop there, and you may totally not be talking about that or have a completely different point or just be mentioning it to go someplace else or whatever, but it's a very interesting aspect.